The 1930s is a decade that falls between the 1920s, which was the time of economic bliss and there was roaring 20s, of course, so they're really well known for that. And the 1940s is also really well known because that's when World War II was going on. The 1930s can kind of get lost in between those two really important decades. So it's really important for us to remember the kinds of things that were going on during the 1930s. It was a really important time that is what propelled us into the 1940s, which is that World War II decade. During the 1930s, there were huge strides in architecture. The Chrysler Building in New York was built in 1930, and the Empire State Building was built in 1931, and here in California, the Golden Gate Bridge was built in 1937. In the films of the time, there were some really big names like Shirley Temple and Theda Bara. Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers were first becoming very popular. The Marx Brothers were also very popular during that time. Rudolph Valentino, of course, he had been very popular during the 20s, but he continued his popularity in the 30s. And also, a man named Walt Disney started to become even more popular, and Disney's first full-length film came out in 1938, and it was called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. During the 1930s, because so many of the workers were displaced from the Depression, necessity is the mother of invention, so the games Scrabble and Monopoly were invented by some of these displaced workers, and of course those are cultural staples for us at this point. Also during that time, superheroes, comic book superheroes became very popular, and certain heroes such as Captain Marvel and Wonder Woman and Batman and Superman became very popular during that time. Some of the headlines in America during the 1930s was that Bonnie and Clyde were finally brought to justice during the 1930s. The Hindenburg crashed in New Jersey in the 1930s. And also the Star-Spangled Banner became our national anthem. Financially, in America during the 1930s, there were pockets of wealth, especially in someplace like New York City. Because of Wall Street, there was still money being made. And there were areas, especially in somewhere like Manhattan, where there were these little shops where you could buy all kinds of things with the money that you were making on Wall Street. In a little shop, like the one being portrayed in She Loves Me, you might find something that had just been invented, nylon stockings, and they would have cost about $1.25, which was very expensive during that time. If you think of New York City in the 1930s, you don't get the images like you do in the West, where it was really dusty and there were a lot of poverty. In the 1930s in Manhattan, you still had quite a bit of money, and culturally it was thriving. And so when we watch She Loves Me, you see that. And they're walking around, they're buying creams, they're buying makeup, they're buying their perfumes, and just really enjoying the life that they have there in that great city.